Colorado is going to take a calculated risk with its vaccine supply. Governor explains why he thinks it's a smart idea. Colorado Congresswoman bragged about the militia. Then those supporters of hers stormed the Capitol. She scrubbed away evidence of those ties. The back and forth over Colorado's property taxes did not end with our vote last November. We'll remember the speech in our state that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. never made, and a look at why Black Lives Matter succeeded where other protest movements have failed. Next. It's a calculated risk. Governor told vaccine providers all across the state it's time to release tens of thousands of doses of COVID-19 vaccine. Now, many of those were supposed to be the round 2 booster shots for people. But Democratic Governor Jared Polis says he wants them to go out now to older Coloradans, like by the end of the week. He's gambling that the supply chain is going to increase soon, and that would allow Colorado to backfill its stores. Governor outlined his strategy to our Chris Vanderveen late this afternoon.
Yeah, it's relatively low risk in the sense the benefit is obvious, starting the protection clock earlier for 40,000 more Coloradans that are 70 and up, 120,000 people protected, beginning protection this week instead of 80,000.
If the state does not get its expected increase in supply, then eventually it's going to have to start cutting back on first doses in the weeks to come. Governor's making this gamble just a week after the Trump administration admitted that the federal stockpile of vaccines did not actually exist. Important to note, if you have a scheduled date right now for a second dose of the vaccine, this change-up should not delay that for you. 4.8% of Coloradans have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. That is 278,000 vaccines out there so far, and it puts our state ahead of the pace of most other states. Heard some chatter from dentists after we mentioned on Friday that dentists in Colorado are in the next phase of vaccines, the upcoming one, not the current one. Of course, the pace of vaccinations varies quite a bit county by county. And we got an earful from dentists who wanted to tell us all about how they got the vaccine. And the whole time, all we could do is just like stare at the light on the ceiling and be like, yeah. So if you're curious whether the staff at your dentist's office has been vaccinated, you should probably just ask them. Our hospitalization numbers statewide continue to drop slowly. 780 people currently hospitalized with COVID-19. This time last week, it was 833 people in the hospital, dropping from that historic high. Our positivity rate, it's the lowest it's been since mid-October. Yesterday, it was just over 4%. It's been a long time since we could say that. Our weekly average is about 5.5%. When we get it under 5, that is when they say the virus is considered to be generally under control. Colorado added 860 new cases of COVID-19 yesterday, brings our weekly average of new cases to its lowest point since the end of October, 1,778 per day. That is some really encouraging news. Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert is cozy with militia types, and, she loves her insurrectionist rhetoric. All that's getting some fresh attention now after some of those groups were involved in the attempted coup at the Capitol. Like the 3%ers, seen photos with Boebert and posing outside of her business. Folks like Robert Gieswein, arrested in Teller County today, accused of storming the Capitol. Here's our Steve Steger.
This weekend, a judge unsealed an arrest warrant for a Colorado militia member accused of storming the Capitol and assaulting a federal officer. The FBI identified Robert Gieswein as apparently affiliated with the 3%ers, a militia group which advocates resistance to government policy. Gieswein also ran his own paramilitary group called the Woodland Wild Dogs. As we searched for information about him this weekend, one reporter from the Daily Beast found this photo on his now-deleted Facebook page. It shows Gieswein and others posing in front of Congresswoman Lauren Boebert's Shooters Bar in Rifle, flashing the hand signal associated with the 3% movement. It was posted in November of 2018. A year later, in December of 2019, as she ran for Congress, Boebert posed for this photo near the state capitol at a rally against the red flag law. Some men in the photo are flashing that same 3% hand signal. Months later, in 2020, she tweeted, quote, "I am the militia," with the hashtag 2A, referencing the Second Amendment. And on January 6th, the day of the insurrection, Boebert tweeted, "Today is 1776, a mantra heard by some storming the Capitol."
Anybody in a leadership role, what they say is very important right now.
Rachel Nielsen leads the Colorado Resistance Collaborative at DU, a group focused on countering violent extremism. She says Boebert's association with an extreme group like the Three Percenters gives that group a louder voice.
Not only a megaphone, but it also gives it legitimacy.
Since the insurrection, Boebert has condemned the violence at the Capitol and deleted that photo of her posing with Three Percenters from her Facebook page.
It's not enough to just not associate with the people. I think we really need to have people who are willing to say that these things are inaccurate.
Now, we asked Boebert's office for an interview today so we could discuss all of this. We never heard back on that request. We did get a copy of a letter she sent to a fellow congressman who made an accusation against her today. And in that, she again condemned the violence at the Capitol, Kyle, and she wrote, quote, "As members of Congress, we have a duty to elevate the discourse and unify during times of crisis."
And Steve, these groups are not new. We see them rally on the steps of Colorado's Capitol from time to time, and I guess it's just, folks who like to have fun with flags and silly costumes and their guns. And clearly Lauren Boebert's part of that crowd. All fun and games until somebody stages an actual insurrection.
Yeah, I talked to Rebecca Nielsen today. She said a lot of these groups gained strength over the last year just because they got more powerful voices talking about them. So it almost offers them a bit of a megaphone and gives them a feeling of legitimacy.
Yeah, and the folks who cover right-wing extremism in America say, do not think for a moment that folks thought that what happened at the Capitol was a loss for them. It's their biggest win in many, many years. Steve, thank you. The most complicated issue on our ballots in November could be coming back already. Colorado passed Amendment B, freezing the assessment rate that helps determine our property taxes. A conservative group would like us to reconsider what we just did. Our Marshall Zellinger looks at what that means for your property taxes.
I try to avoid math on TV because, as I showed you in my Amendment B explainer in October, it can be complicated. Amendment B, which voters passed 2 months ago, dealt with assessment rates, part of the calculation that determines how much you pay in property taxes. Voters said yes and kept the residential assessment rate at 7.15% instead of letting it drop like it was supposed to do.
Even if the assessment rate stays the same, your value of your house goes up, and that means that you pay more money.
Michael Fields is with Colorado Rising State Action, a conservative-minded group that campaigned against Amendment B and is already pushing for another vote to reduce property tax rates. Their proposal would reduce the assessment rate you just locked in at 7.15% and make it 6.5%. It would also reduce the assessment rate that businesses and commercial property owners pay from 29% to 26%. This would not be on the ballot, though, until November 2022.
We wanted to start early enough so people could have the discussion, is this something they want? But also wanted to put a little bit of pressure on the legislature to come up with a fix before it really hurts homeowners in the upcoming years.
If the assessment rate drops, you pay less in property taxes, which means you pay less to local school districts, police and fire, libraries, and parks and rec. But even when the assessment rate stays the same, like it did with Amendment B, certain parts of your property tax bill can still go up. Voters in 3 metro area school districts approved ballot issues in November giving more money to their schools. Let's use a $500,000 home to show you actual dollar amounts. A $500,000 home has a taxable value of $35,750. Here's an example of a property tax bill of a homeowner in the Cherry Creek School District. Before November's election, that homeowner paid $1,680 to Cherry Creek Schools. Since the Cherry Creek Schools ballot issue passed, the tax rate for the school district changed. Now this homeowner will pay $1,778, almost $100 more. A Littleton Schools resident in that $500,000 home will pay almost $200 more in property tax to the district. And a Denver Public Schools resident in a $500,000 home will see an increase of about $55. I promise I'm going to make every one of you experts on property taxes. Bottom line, when voters passed Amendment B, freezing the assessment rate the same as it was, maybe you thought you'd pay the same in property tax next year as you did the year before. If not for those certain school districts, there's this caveat. Your assessor is about to reassess the value of your home. So if it's valued higher, Kyle, well, that will impact that part of the equation and you'll pay more.
You should hide those shiny awards, Marshall, before the assessor comes by, because if she peeks in the window and sees those, she might think you're loaded.
They're not considered improvements.
Oh, cool. Phew. Oh, thank goodness. Okay. All right. Well, very good. At least pull the blinds on that beautiful kitchen you guys just put in. Thank you, Marshall. Hey, I just wanted to pass along my appreciation for what you all did last week for Jeffco Prosperity Partners. You raised $27,000 for that nonprofit. They work one-on-one with families in Jefferson County to help them get out of poverty, like a personalized plan and then financial support so that they can go in whatever direction they want to get a better job or an advanced degree, to get into a home, to deal with mental health challenges. You have now raised $2.6 million for Colorado's nonprofits through Word of Thanks since last summer. We have a first coming up this week. I have an idea that I think is going to be fun, like just pure fun. Nothing says that raising money to improve lives in Colorado can't also be a fun thing. Word of Thanks, every Wednesday around here. This Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we remembered the day he was supposed to be in Colorado and where he was instead. While we examine why some movements for social justice get traction and others don't.
We're starting to see these atrocities play out right before our eyes with Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and all of a sudden it was like enough is enough.
Research in Colorado about the power of Black Lives Matter, what it means for future movements. Next. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was supposed to speak in Colorado at CU Boulder, February 3rd, 1965. He never arrived here. He was in jail that day in Selma, Alabama. He'd been arrested 2 days prior to his scheduled speech in Colorado. Dr. King had led a march to Selma to get America's attention that the work was not done. He led a march there knowing that he would be arrested again. So Dr. King had prepared a letter to go out just as his arrest was making headlines. He wrote, "When the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, many decent Americans were lulled into complacency because they thought the day of difficult struggle was over." In the half century since he wrote that letter, since Dr. King's missed speech in Colorado, how many of us in white America have been lulled into complacency thinking that the day of difficult struggle was over? Dr. King's clear task for America then remains now. Dismantle white supremacy. Perhaps you have noticed, white supremacy seems pretty emboldened lately. Dr. King's letter, written in 1965, the week that he was due to speak in Colorado, extended a hand to everyone willing to meet that challenge. "We need the help of all decent Americans," Dr. King wrote. "Your help can make the difference." Last summer's Black Lives Matter protests made some real change in Colorado and around the country. Our Brian Wendland talked to a University of Denver researcher looking at why those protests moved the needle when other movements have not.
My research kind of centers on consumer behavior and just the psychology of why we do what we do.
Gia Nardini was planning to study how the marriage equality movement succeeded when things changed this summer.
And then the Black Lives Matter movement was playing out before our eyes.
Her team pivoted and began to look at these social justice protests in real time. As Black Lives Matter grew in all 50 states and policy changes started passing through city and state governments, the team dug into what made this movement so successful.
And it's when we can kind of change the norm and make this the norm, social justice, that we begin to see policy follow suit.
As an assistant professor of marketing, Nardini took tools from her field and applied them to the protests. Things like consumer psychology, decision-making, and social norms.
Some of which include really nurturing grassroots leaders and connecting people to the movement and within that movement, connecting those people to each other.
Another takeaway for successful movements: start small.
Not to expect change overnight, not to go for policy change up front, but instead kind of build up to that policy change.
Nardini hopes to inspire researchers in other fields to focus on this kind of research.
To recognize the connections and the ability to make a difference, even in a discipline that may not seem directly related.
And to help future activists understand what it takes to change society.
I hope, it's helpful for activists. I hope it's helpful for scholars. And I hope it inspires people.
For Next, I'm Brian Wendland.
Every day is Bring Your Child to Work Day. Parents are working from home, kids are remote schooling. This family turned it into something special.
I've never been able to display work with my son before, so I think that's a really big career highlight for me.
Turning isolation into art. Next. I apologize. I had a little mental malfunction there. Sorry, they got to reboot me during these commercial breaks. Pandemic has brought a lot of families closer together. There's a father and son in Denver who use it to create art.
It's special just being able to spend the time together and create something together in the same space at the same time. My name's Dan Erickson. This is my son Omen, and we are both artists. We're at Hazel on South Pearl. We have an art show that we did together. My work is displayed next to Omen's work. At some point I always wanted to do a show with Omen. From the time he did his very first piece, I thought, oh, this would be great if I could maybe have him do a show with me someday. I didn't think it would be this soon, but I think with the way that COVID is affecting businesses and galleries like this, it seemed like just a good chance to pitch it to the curator and say, would you be open to me showing some work with my son? Just as something different and something maybe a little more uplifting than your typical just art on a wall type of show. My hope is just to be able to show what we created while we were in quarantine together and hopefully bring some of the joy that we experienced during that creation process just to the people viewing it, because it's kind of hard to find that silver lining these days. Family is more important than work, but it is also important to work together as a family in times like this. What do you think, Omen?
Family is more important than work.
I love you.
Love you too, Dad.
Kid knows what's up. It was not another dog that you spotted out on a hiking trail. Your double take is the most Colorado thing we saw today. Plus your feedback next. The most Colorado thing we saw today is a hike with the greatest of all time, the goat. Well, it's a hike with a goat. Ann spotted the group coming off the trail at Mount Falcon Park on Sunday. A lot of dogs up there almost every day, but only one family seen hitting the hike with their pet goat. If you see goats doing stuff or anything else that just seems like Colorado to you, email a photo or video to next@9news.com or tweet us with the hashtag HeyNext. Question came in via text tonight. Hey, Kyle, have you gotten your vaccine? I have not. I imagine I'm probably a ways down the list, but if I haven't already mentioned it, when they tap me on the shoulder and they say, hey, buddy, your turn, I'm going to go, great, let's do this. And then I'll tell you about it. How about that? Kara says, new intro music has got to go. I've been playing the air drums for 3 years. The music now is like a Teletubby show. Is there plaid Teletubby? See you next time.